George Berkeley was an Irish philosopher, born on March 12, 1685, who contributed significantly to the development of empiricism and idealism. His most famous work, A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, published in 1710, is a cornerstone in the philosophical tradition that challenges the existence of material objects. Berkeley's philosophy revolves around the idea that the world is fundamentally composed of ideas rather than matter, a doctrine known as immaterialism or subjective idealism. This text explores his revolutionary thought on perception, the nature of reality, and the role of God in sustaining existence. The empirical foundations of Berkeley's philosophy. Berkeley's philosophy begins with an empirical foundation, a method inspired by earlier empiricists like John Locke. He believed that all knowledge comes from sensory experience, but unlike Locke, who distinguished between primary and secondary qualities, Berkeley rejected this division. In A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, he argues that all qualities of objects, such as size, shape, and color, are entirely dependent on perception. According to him, there is no existence outside of what is perceived, famously stating, "To be is to be perceived," in Latin, esse est percipi. The refutation of material substance. One of the central arguments of Berkeley's treatise is the refutation of the idea of material substance. Berkeley argues that the concept of matter, or a substance that exists independently of perception, is not only unnecessary but also incoherent. For Berkeley, the existence of an object is bound to it being perceived by a mind. This leads to his immaterialism, the idea that the physical world as we understand it does not exist independently of perception. Berkeley believed that if something is not being perceived, it simply does not exist. The role of God in Berkeley's philosophy. A key aspect of Berkeley's immaterialism is the role of God. While human beings perceive objects directly through their senses, the continuity and consistency of the world are maintained by God's perception. For Berkeley, God is the ultimate perceiver, ensuring that objects continue to exist even when no human is perceiving them. This theological aspect of Berkeley's philosophy differentiates him from atheistic empiricists and demonstrates his commitment to integrating his religious beliefs with his philosophical outlook. The critique of abstraction. In A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, Berkeley criticizes the notion of abstract ideas, a concept prominent in the work of philosophers like John Locke. According to Locke, we can form abstract ideas, such as the concept of a triangle that applies to all triangles, regardless of their specific features. Berkeley, however, argues that it is impossible to conceive of such abstractions. For Berkeley, all ideas are particular, and the notion of abstraction is unnecessary and misleading. Perception and the mind-body problem. Berkeley's emphasis on perception challenges traditional philosophical views on the mind-body problem. In denying the existence of material substance, Berkeley sidesteps the problem of how mind and body interact, which had puzzled philosophers like René Descartes. Since Berkeley holds that there is no material substance, there is no need for an explanation of how the immaterial mind interacts with the material body. Instead, Berkeley focuses on how ideas exist in the mind, and the question of interaction becomes irrelevant in his framework. Berkeley's influence on modern philosophy. Berkeley's treatise was not immediately accepted, and his ideas faced criticism from many contemporary philosophers. However, his work has had a lasting influence on the development of modern philosophy. Immanuel Kant, in the 18th century, reacted against Berkeley's immaterialism by arguing that while we can know phenomena, things as they appear to us, we cannot know the noumenal world, things in themselves. Berkeley's ideas also laid the groundwork for later idealist philosophers, such as Johann Gottlieb Fichte and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Challenges to Berkeley's idealism. One of the most common challenges to Berkeley's philosophy is the argument that his idealism leads to solipsism, the belief that only one's mind exists. If objects only exist when perceived, it raises the question of how we can know that other minds, or even other objects, exist at all. Berkeley counters this by appealing to the regularity and consistency of perception, which he attributes to the divine will of God. Nonetheless, the charge of solipsism has remained a persistent critique of Berkeley's philosophy. The language of nature. Berkeley also proposed that the world could be understood as a kind of language that God uses to communicate with human beings. Just as words convey meaning, the objects of perception are like signs that point to ideas in our minds. This notion that nature functions like a language provided Berkeley with a way to explain how perception works without the need for material substance. In this way, Berkeley's philosophy can be seen as an attempt to reconcile science, religion, and philosophy. Berkeley's criticism of Newtonian science. While Berkeley was a contemporary of Sir Isaac Newton, he was critical of certain aspects of Newtonian science. In particular, Berkeley rejected the notion of absolute space and time, which were central to Newton's theories. For Berkeley, space and time, like all other aspects of reality, are dependent on perception. He argued that space is relational, meaning that the distance between two objects exists only in relation to the objects themselves as they are perceived. This view places Berkeley in opposition to the mechanistic philosophy that was dominant in his time. Berkeley's argument against skepticism. Berkeley believed that his immaterialism offered a powerful response to skepticism. Skeptics argue that we cannot know the external world with certainty, as our senses might deceive us. Berkeley, however, argued that because the external world consists solely of ideas, which are immediately perceived by the mind, there is no gap between perception and reality. For Berkeley, we can be certain of the reality of the world because it is composed of ideas that are directly perceived. The rejection of the veil of perception. One of Berkeley's significant contributions to philosophy is his rejection of the veil of perception theory. This theory, associated with thinkers like René Descartes and John Locke, holds that we do not perceive objects directly but rather through a veil of ideas or representations. Berkeley rejected this view, arguing that we perceive objects directly as they are, ideas in the mind. There is no veil separating us from reality because reality itself consists of ideas. Berkeley's later life and legacy. After publishing a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge, Berkeley continued to write and contribute to philosophy and theology. In 1721, he published 3 dialogues between Hylas and Philonous, a more accessible presentation of his immaterialist philosophy. Berkeley became Bishop of Cloyne in 1734 and remained active in philosophical and theological debates until his death on January 14, 1753. Berkeley's ideas were initially met with skepticism and misunderstanding. His immaterialism was considered radical, and many of his contemporaries struggled to take his views seriously. However, over time, his work has gained recognition for its depth and originality. Today, Berkeley is considered one of the most important figures in early modern philosophy, and his immaterialism continues to provoke debate and discussion. George Berkeley's A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge represents a bold and original contribution to philosophy. By rejecting the existence of material substance and proposing that reality consists solely of ideas, Berkeley challenged the philosophical assumptions of his time. His work has had a lasting impact on subsequent philosophical traditions, particularly in the areas of epistemology and metaphysics. Although Berkeley's ideas were controversial in his lifetime, they have earned him a place as one of the most significant philosophers of the early modern period.